all the people that you have worked with in terms of figuring out their Enneagram number and what that means, have you had people that just want to fight you on it? Like, that's not me.
I've never had somebody really fight me on it. Sometimes someone will be like, I don't want to be put in a box. And my standard answer to that is, listen, the Enneagram is actually never going to put you in a box. It's going to tell you about a box you're already in and how to get out of it.
You ever met anybody who wanted to stay in the box?
You know what? It seems to be the human condition that people want to fall asleep and live on autopilot forever. But those who are wise will do the inner work that leads to living not in a box, but in the freedom of the world.
Welcome to What We Really Want, conversations about connection. Settle in and get ready for a great conversation. Let's talk about what we really want.
Hey friends, welcome back to What We Really Want. This is episode 29. It's called Desperate for a Fix, and our guest is Ian Morgan Cron. Many of you will recognize that name. He is the author of The Road Back to You, which is considered by many to be the authoritative book on the Enneagram. Enneagram's a personality typing system that identifies 9 types of people and how they relate to one another, to themselves, and to the world. You heard Jill Gullahorn talk about the Enneagram and her work on that back in episode 7. Ian also is the host of Typology, which is a podcast all about his work on the Enneagram. Every episode, he has a different guest, and they talk about that person's type and how that shows up. And just the goal is to better understand ourselves and the world in which we live. Another thing about Ian that most people know, but not everyone, is that Ian is a person in recovery. And he talks about that in our conversation very candidly, very openly. And it's exciting because one of the things that has come as a result of his own experience as a person who struggles with addiction is his new book. If you're listening to this on the day it comes out, it's January 21st of 2025. A week later, on the 28th of January, Ian's book, The Fix, How the 12 Steps Offer a Surprising Path of Transformation for the Well-Adjusted, the Down and Out, and everyone in between, is going to be available. I'm so excited for you to get to hear the way that Ian processes life, the way he processes recovery and addiction. It's so unifying. It's so comforting. It was a great conversation. I got to just sit back a lot and just listen to him talk about his own experience. And there are so many things that I related to. I hope there will be for you as well. We're going to put several links in the show notes, including ways that you can get a hold of Ian's books, like The Road Back to You, The Story of You, and The Fix, how you can connect to the Typology podcast. We're even going to put a link to a hilarious song that Andy Gullahorn wrote, called Self-Awareness. And when you pull up that YouTube video, you'll understand why. It's episode 29. It's called Desperate for a Fix, which coincidentally is one of the chapters in Ian's book. Our guest is Ian Morgan Cron, and our conversation is coming up right now. Ian Morgan Cron, I've been really looking forward to this conversation. So thanks for being on What We Really Want today.
Man, it's my pleasure, Greg. Thank you.
Let me just ask you the question we always start with. Ian, what do you really want out of our conversation today?
Well, what I really want is to deepen and improve my life and the lives of others would probably be the answer I'd give you.
I like that. Let's do it. So I know going into this, and I would guess that many people know some elements of what we'd call your biography. But before we jump into talking about the book, talking about Enneagram, I'd love to know a little bit more about your identity. Since we've never met, as much as we can in a couple of minutes, just begin to get to know you and let our listeners do the same thing. So could you give us that opportunity just by talking about yourself for a few minutes?
It's so interesting you're asking this question. Someone asked me a question the other day that I loved because it threw me back on my heels because of the weight of it. He just looked at me and he said, "Why were you born?" And I said, and I wasn't able to answer it with any great, answer in the moment. But I went home and I journaled about it. And I said, came down to this one sentence. I was born to introduce people to insights and experiences and ideas that deepen and improve their lives. And hence my first answer. And that has been the story of my life. I'm a late middle-aged guy. I live in Nashville, Tennessee. I got 3 beautiful kids, a wonderful wife of 38 years. I was raised in Connecticut in a pretty troubled home. Father, who was an alcoholic and a drug addict, died from that disease. And so my life has been really dedicated to trying to understand what it means to be human and to help people on a journey toward transformation and insight and self-awareness that I've been on myself. And so I just like sharing that journey with other people.
You know, when I was making out a list of people that I'd love to have on the podcast and your name was on it, the primary thing that I was thinking about was just the way that I've come to understand how the Enneagram is so helpful in making healthy connections. And we'll talk about that later, but I knew that, you wrote The Road Back to You and that, you were kind of the Enneagram guy. You've got the typology podcast, all of those things that people know. What I didn't know about you is that you have your own recovery story. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I know a lot of more people are going to be finding out about now that your new book, The Fix, is coming out soon. But as a person in recovery myself, I'd love to hear a little bit more about that journey that ultimately, led you to where you are and currently with the book that's coming out soon.
Yeah. So my recovery journey began in 1987, which is when I first went into recovery for alcohol. And I spent a good long time as a person who abstained from drinking. And then about 4 years ago, I had a relapse on prescription medications, namely Adderall, Xanax, and Klonopin. Mm-hmm. And went to treatment and was reintroduced to the 12 steps as a design for living that would help me to live in a broken world as a broken person, just trying to have a means of uncovering, discarding old ideas and living a new and generative life. And I wanted to, after going on 5 years of sobriety now in this second round, I wanted to share that journey with other people. So The Fix is a book that, the subtitle kind of says it all, right? How the 12 steps offer a surprising path of transformation for the well-adjusted, the down and out, and everyone in between. I really wanted people who don't necessarily identify as alcoholics or drug addicts, although that might be their problem. I wanted soccer moms who were addicted to people-pleasing.
Yep.
And I wanted overeaters, and I wanted to talk to people that are addicted to their work and it's destroying their families slowly or quickly. I wanted to speak to people who have a problem with sports betting. I wanted to talk to, the list of addictions is endless, right? Mm-hmm. And they're soul crushing. Even if you don't keep a bottle of vodka in the desk drawer, you know what I mean? Like any addiction is soul crushing. It takes life away from us. So I wanted to be able to introduce the 12 steps as a program for living for anybody that wanted to experience a depth of relationship with God, themselves, and others that they don't currently have, and they can have.
There are a couple of phrases in what you just said that jumped out at me. You talked about path of transformation, and then another thing you said was discarding old ideas. And those three words roll off the tongue pretty fast, but that's not something that happens very quickly, is it?
No, I have a bunch of coaching clients, and some of them are just in the corporate space, and some of them are more, personal lifestyle coaching clients. And, at my age, I'm at a point in my life where I just have to tell 30-year-olds or 40-year-olds, listen, this is going to take a minute. Yeah. We live in a time in a zeitgeist where everybody thinks that there should be a spiritual hack that gets us from A to Z super quickly. Yeah. And I can tell you that doesn't exist, right? But it's good to have a plan. And most people don't have a plan for transformation. They just don't, right? They're just kind of going at it, cobbling together some practices and ways of being in the world and hoping for the best. The cool thing about the 12 steps is they're a comprehensive plan for living, a program for living. And you work them one by one in their order. And then here's the great thing, Greg. My sponsor said something the other day that kind of my sponsor's an awesome guy. And he says mystical things to me sometimes and then walks away, He said to me the other day, he goes, Ian, once you've practiced the steps for a while, you've worked them for a while, the numbers fall away.
Wow.
And it's now just an instinct It's a way of being in the world. You don't have to actually even think about the numbers anymore. You're just drawing and practicing them naturally as a reaction or a response to the world. And I love that idea, right?
I do too.
I think that's available to everybody, whether they identify as alcoholics or sex addicts or drug addicts or whatever your thing is, your fix of choices, that's available to everybody.
I love the picture that he used of the numbers falling away. And I also love the fact that the more people you talk to about something that's important like this, you get a lot of different ways of framing it, a lot of different ways of looking at it. When I'm talking to people about the 12 steps, often I'll talk about how the first time you are working the steps when you've never done it before, 1, 2, 3, where you're really looking at your relationship between you and God, your higher power, that can take a while, and that is reframing. But then once you get into the things that you do after you've made the decision to turn your will and your life over to the care of God as you understand Him, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, the inventory, the sharing it with someone, becoming aware of your defects, humbly asking God to remove your shortcomings, and then the process of amends. Once you've done that, step 10 to me is like a daily 4 through 9. It's keeping those short records. I use the analogy of if you moved into a house that hadn't been lived in 50 years, it's going to take forever to clean that house. But once it's clean, it doesn't take very long each day to keep it clean.
Yeah. So the other day I was thinking about how if you were to kind of summarize the steps, right? And I've come to a point where I look at it two ways. One is steps 1 to 3 is about mending our ruptured relationship with God, right? And then 4 through 7 is about mending your relationship with yourself.
Yep.
8 and 9 is mending your relationship with others. And then 10 through 12 are really about developing or cultivating a lifestyle that supports health and growth in each of those domains.
That have been repaired.
Yes, going forward, right? And maybe another way to look at it is 1 through 3 is about the now. Where am I right now, the present moment, right? I'm powerless over this thing this compulsive, addictive pattern in my life. My life is becoming unmanageable. I'm coming to believe and understand a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. And then I'm turning my will and my life over to the care of that God as I understand Him. So that's about the present moment, right?
Yeah.
And then 4 through 9 is about the past, right? And then 10 through 12, man, it's just about the future.
Yeah.
So, I love how you can break these steps into sort of categories that help us understand the inner genius, quiet inner genius in the steps that really makes sense when you begin to parse them.
As a Christian, when we look at the book of Revelation, John is told what you're about to hear, things that are, things that were, and things that are to be. And I mean, that word revelation is kind of what you're talking about that we receive when we're going through the steps. It's a type of revelation.
Well, I got news for you, man. I've had a couple of instances in my life where I thought the 12 steps were the book of Revelations. It was sort of like, wow, this is a lot of information here that's being, as one friend of mine says, uncovered, discovered, and discarded. That journey is one that goes on and on and on and on.
As you've written the book, and I imagine, I've never written a book, but I would imagine that if I was in the process of however many months it takes to write a book, I probably would be talking about it to a lot of the people in my life. When you say that this is for the well-adjusted, the down and out, everyone in between, have you encountered many people who push back again, like that's not for me? Or once you explain it, do they kind of get it? We'll be right back.
How have things gotten so out of control? How did something that didn't seem like such a big deal at first completely take over? Porn and sex addiction are destroying your life and killing your relationships. You know you can't keep going on like this, keeping secrets and telling lies. Something has to change. But how? Most men who struggle with unwanted or addictive sexual behavior have tried to fix it on their own. But sex addiction is powerful and complicated. Recovery is possible, but it isn't easy. It requires us to focus on more than just behavior. It requires us to look at our whole lives and the parts of our stories that contribute to addiction. If you're ready to find freedom, maybe it's time for you to get to the roots. The Roots Retreat is a 4-day therapeutic and spiritual intensive. You'll work with therapists and coaches who specialize in sex addiction and recovery. You'll learn how to take healthy ownership of your behavior. You'll discover how your life experiences set the stage for addiction to develop. You'll see how God factors into your struggle, and you'll learn effective tools for ongoing recovery after the retreat. If you're ready to stop trying what doesn't work, if you're ready to experience real hope, healing, and change, let's get to the roots.
Visit awakenrecovery.com/rootsretreat or click the Roots Retreat link in show notes.
You know what's so fascinating to me, Greg, is whenever I say to somebody, everybody is an addict. And I say that in the book, right?
Mm-hmm.
I actually quote the great Christian psychiatrist Gerald May, who wrote that wonderful book, Addiction and Grace.
Yeah.
He says, to be human is to be addicted, and to be addicted is to stand in need of grace.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like when I've said to people, everyone's an addict, everybody looks at me as if to say, oh yeah. Like I'm surprised at how little pushback I get.
Yeah.
Now, when I do get pushback, I have to then define what I mean by addiction, right? So here's how I would define addiction. Addiction is an unhealthy, compulsive relationship with a person, behavior, or substance that has mood-altering effects and negative consequences. Now, if you are a soccer mom addicted to people-pleasing, or you're a guy who's addicted to his work or to porn or to anything, if this is true, and I think this is actually a pretty good summary of even the diagnostic criteria that we use for addiction, then everybody's an addict, man. All of us have pathological relationships with people, places, behaviors, or substances that we turn to for a mood-altering fix and that have negative consequences. Mm-hmm. So, granted, there are some people-pleasing versus a meth addiction. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, one has more severe consequences in the short term.
Sure.
But in the long term, all addictions are soul-crushing. Whether you keep a bottle of vodka in the desk drawer or you're just, addicted to shopping or to a relationship that is dysfunctional and will never, ever actually become healthy or good for you. Yeah. And actually none of us has just one addiction. Like, we're seething cauldrons of them. It's just what it means to be human.
Yeah.
The good news is that we can be free of the snare of addiction if we have a program for living like the 12 steps.
So let me ask you this. What has your experience been when people are acknowledging, in touch with the people, processes, substances that they believe themselves to be addicted to? Do you experience a variation in the amount of shame that they carry based on what it is? Or like someone who's addicted to people pleasing versus somebody who's addicted to porn and sex? Some people might immediately think, well, the person who's addicted to porn and sex is going to have a deeper level of shame. But not necessarily. What have you experienced when you're talking to people who are in touch with their addictions? Is shame a universal experience, or have you found some variance in that?
Well, I think shame is a universal experience. I don't know anybody who is. In fact, I'm always worried if I meet someone who is shameless, then I often start to wonder if they're sociopathic. So now that said, shame is a toxic emotion. Mm. There is a kind of shame that is not toxic. There's a kind of positive shame. That's the kind of shame that prevents me from showing up at church naked. You know what I mean? It's like that provides some boundaries to my behavior. But the kind of shame that tells us that we are fundamentally bad, that there's something wrong with us that will never be fixed, that needs to be hidden or anesthetized through a person, a behavior, or a substance, that kind of shame is deadly. Mm-hmm. But it can be regarded or mitigated.
I've just been really struck in the area in which my wife and I work, which is primarily in people who have been impacted by sexual brokenness and addiction, that even in a room of guys who are at a sexual recovery meeting, you'll have one guy whose experience has not escalated beyond, say, pornography, masturbation. You got another guy who's had, 200 anonymous hookups. But to hear them talk, the person who has quote unquote only gone to porn will find a way to have this internal narrative about how their stuff is just as bad, if not worse, than the guy with 200 hookups. That's just been really remarkable to me, just to see how powerful that toxic experience with shame can be.
Yeah, and everybody has it, and regardless of the level of it, it's in the body. It's a very unpleasant experience, like somatically in your body, it feels terrible, and it's spiritually lethal, because it is predicated on a lie that will pull the rug out from underneath your spiritual health.
Yep. So I want to go back to something you said when you were referring to the subtitle of the book, which, I had written down here just because as I read the subtitle, not knowing anything else about the book, I'm like, I can't wait for it to come out. The fact that that recovery, transformation, receiving what the book description says, that the steps are going to be a vital spiritual awakening that will give you an entirely new and radically beautiful orientation toward the life God has for you. Mm-hmm. When did you realize that recovery, transformation, like receiving that new, beautiful orientation, was not going to happen quickly?
Oh, to be fair, it's just not across the board. I have experienced profound spiritual transformation in certain domains of my life, in certain areas, and in others, it's slower going, right? Bill W. says in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? He says, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. And I think that's true in my life, right? I have some areas where, but I would say that across the board, I'm trending in the right direction. I have ups and downs, but overall, when I look at the market, if you will, I'm trending in the right direction. So I feel very, very hopeful and expectant all the time that new things shall be revealed and new frontiers of healing will be realized and arrived in.
I've experienced both myself and with a lot of people that I talk to that there can be a little bit of a letdown or a disappointed feeling when we realize that this is a rest of our lives process, that it's not going to be like, okay, we finish this checklist and then we're done with recovery. And also sometimes when they realize it isn't going to be as fast as they wanted. But why is it good that all of the benefits of recovery don't happen immediately or quickly?
Well, because this is part of the great adventure, man. I don't want the great adventure to last only, 6 months. I'm on an adventure for the rest of my life with this thing, into a new level of intimacy, a new depth of closeness and nearness to God that I hope, increases every year of my life, and that the 12 steps can help bring about. It's interesting. People think that when you first come to a 12-step meeting, right, people tend to think, well, I'm coming here just to figure out how not to watch porn or drink or drug or whatever my thing is, overeat, overwork, spend, sports betting, whatever your thing is, right? I'm just trying to figure out how to stop. And that's all these people are going to teach me how to do. I'm going to go here and learn how not to drink. And then you get to meetings and you realize, oh, wait a minute, that's just the beginning of this great adventure, right? So you come to the program, you do steps 1 to 3. The obsession with porn or drinking or drugs is taken from you. And in order to now continue on that path and to sustain it, I have to do the rest of the steps, right? I got to keep working through, and I got to look at the underlying causes and conditions that continue to underwrite the addiction to make sure that I have it properly managed, right? That I have it so I can keep up a daily reprieve from it. Now, that being said, I feel like one of the things that people also don't realize is here's the purpose of the 12 steps. It's in the 12th step. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. So the purpose of the steps is to facilitate a spiritual awakening that will render the need for our addictions unnecessary. So I don't get up every day, Greg, and think to myself, man, I just got to not, I'm not worried today about taking a drink or a drug. I'm just not thinking about that way, right? Now, I do ask God every day, to help me keep sober for another 24 hours. But at the same time, now I'm focused on all kinds of other stuff in my 12-step journey. It's really about developing a kind of character and personhood that is aligned with my deepest values and faith, to live by the principles that are embedded inside of each of these steps: honesty, integrity, perseverance, and having a community that helps me on the journey of realizing those virtues in my life and enjoying them. I mean, really, isn't it funny? You go to meetings and I'm not a porn or sex addict. I'm surprised because, I'm like Velcro for addictions. It's amazing to me that that's not one. That and gambling. Gambling has never appealed to me, maybe because I don't like dark rooms, casinos, and cigarette smoke. I don't know. But that said, there's so much laughter in the rooms of recovery.
Boy, that surprises people that are new, doesn't it?
Oh my gosh. I mean, laughter. And we laugh at things that other people may not laugh at, but it's like, I'm always amazed, right?
The thin line between tragedy and comedy.
Yeah, well, but because we know that we're laughing about how delusional we were, that the fixes we had come up with to solve the problem of human pain and distress, the dumb, crazy stuff that we did, and we can laugh in relief that we no longer are held by, the shackles of those things. We're no longer tyrannized from the shadows by these addictions. And we've gotten on with our lives. So there's a kind of, dare I say, merriment that breaks out, because there's relief. But also there's so much joy in those rooms because, as my friend Kurt Thompson said, the laughter in the rooms of recovery are proof that the pain of addiction doesn't get the last word, God does.
Yeah, that's so good. I want to pivot now, if we can, for a second, and talk about once we have begun to experience and have established that sobriety where the addictive pattern in our lives is not so powerful, it's not calling the shots day to day anymore, that opens up so many opportunities for us to discover more about ourselves. And so then, and now I can't remember a time that there's ever been as much opportunity to have very helpful resources and tools to help with that self-discovery process. And one of the ones that so many people have been coming to understand more in the last 10 years or so is the Enneagram. I mean, there seems like there's a pretty overlapping Venn diagram between your book that's coming out and one of your books that's already come out, The Road Back to You. I think that there's so much powerful self-discovery in doing Enneagram work that helps me understand myself better, how I fit in the world, and how I connect with those around me. I just would love to talk to you about that for a couple minutes, if that's cool.
Let's have at it.
Yeah. So I've taken Enneagram assessments many times, but I had never taken the IEQ 9, and it confirmed what I thought. I was listening to an episode of Typology where you had Chip Dodd on. I don't know if you remember because you've done a bunch of episodes, but he was talking about how he's always seen himself as a 2, but people who work with him have thought that he was an 8. And in unpacking that, you kind of you used the phrase, social 2. And then how 8 shows up when you're under stress and all that. And I was just listening to that thinking, oh my gosh, that's me. So when I took it, that's exactly what came up for me is that I'm an Enneagram 2, and then it came up as a social 2. And so just in reading through the detailed report that comes from the IEQ 9, which people who haven't been to your website don't know what that means, but maybe we can tell them it's a report, an assessment and a report. Like it can give so much affirmation, clarity, challenge, all the above to someone who's really wanting to understand themselves better.
Yeah, I think any tool that helps us grow in self-understanding and self-awareness, which leads to better emotional self-regulation, will help you on your journey of sobriety. Bill Wilson talks about not just physical sobriety, but he talks about emotional sobriety, which is it's more than this, but I would define it as the ability to remain emotionally balanced in the face of whatever life throws at you, right? So serenity, it's a place of utter God reliance, not self-reliance.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that the Enneagram reveals is that, first of all, every Enneagram type has an addiction, right? So we can just figure that out right away, right? I mean, you're addicted to needing to meet the needs of others in order to bolster your own self-esteem.
Yep.
And that is a compulsive, reflexive pattern in your life. And so, when I have sponsees, eventually, not right away, but eventually I'm like, let's do a little Enneagram work, once they've gotten physically sober and emotionally, some they're regulated and doing okay. I'm like, let's just jump into a little Enneagram work and let's continue to uncover, discover, and discard the old ideas of your Enneagram type. So you don't just have an addiction to porn and sex. You have an addiction to, we could even call it possibly codependency. When you live in such a way that you don't feel like you can be happy unless everyone else is happy. And you do that compulsively, and it makes your life unmanageable.
Yeah. And the thing that's so encouraging as I did that assessment today is I can see that shifting over time.
Yes.
I can see that changing and see growth, which is so super encouraging. But it started with, first of all, hearing things like that, I would have gone, hey, not so fast, and then started defending why what I'm doing is not that, but then starting to realize, hey, that's actually true. And then why do I do that? And then what would it look like for me to keep all the best parts of that without the damaging parts of that?
Yeah. And it's about dialing it back. It's also about, that is a external behavior that's trying to solve an internal problem. Mm-hmm. And whenever you turn to external things, substances, people, or behaviors to solve an internal problem, you end up causing more problems than you solve in the end. Mm-hmm. And it will end with negative consequence upon negative consequence for you.
Yeah, but in the short term, they'll like me.
Oh, yeah. Well, listen, I went to a meeting in my 12-step community last night, and someone I actually shared it. I said, I think for a long time in my life, from the time I was a little kid, I was an unquiet spirit. And just a kid that was unquiet. I was restless. I was irritable. I was not irritable so much. It's just discontent, listless. And I always sort of felt like my clothes were on backwards. You know what I mean? Like just moving through the world with my clothes on inside out, And when I drank or when I, used a mood altering substance, suddenly the voices of disquiet quieted down. And I felt more at ease and at home in the world. And we could talk about the neurobiology of that, but it's the fact of the matter is, though addictions are all biological, physiological, economics are involved, socioeconomics are involved, everything is involved, right? They're very complicated. At their root, they're a spiritual problem. It's a spiritual malady that requires a spiritual solution. In addition to working with those other things, like I'm not downplaying that part of the journey.
I want to ask you a quick question about the disquiet and the analogy you used of feeling like you're walking through the world with your clothes on inside out or backwards.
Yeah.
I want to understand that better.
Sure.
Because to me, that brought up at least two things that could mean. I'm sensing that something's not right, but I don't really know what it is. There's just a general unsettledness, or I feel like this is the case and everybody else can see it, and so they see me as different, and that's not okay. Which of those or something else did that disquiet feel most like to you?
Both of those.
Yeah?
Yeah, both. And I wouldn't be surprised to meet somebody who has one or the other or both, right? Listen, it's actually this is not the sole purview of any one class of people called addicts and alcoholics, right?
Yeah.
Like this is everybody. Like
it keeps going back to that, doesn't it?
It does. Listen, I'm a Christian, right? But I've done a lot of reading around Buddhism because I'm fascinated with some of their teachings that are consistent with the gospel, right? And they do a really good job of explaining things that we don't, right? At times, right? And one of the things they talk about is that life is suffering. And people hear that and they don't really understand what the Buddhists mean when they say that. When a Buddhist says life is suffering, what they're saying is that there is always a fundamental sense of dis-ease. There's always a sense of craving, wanting something we don't have or not wanting something we do have. There's this sense of inquietude, of just kind of discontent, restlessness, a little angst, a little existential angst. Everybody has it. And the gospel says that's true. The Buddhist says it's true. We should just pay attention when so many people say that's true. And because we have that fundamental baseline state, and some people have it more than others, granted, the fact of the matter is everybody goes looking for fixes, quick hacks to get around it, to quiet it, to feel safe, to feel soothed, to feel secure, to feel seen, to feel okay with ourselves and the world. And some of us find it in drugs, some find it in alcohol, some find it in sex. People do it in the craziest of ways. And I don't know anybody who's exempt from the journey of being on the addiction continuum.
And one of the hacks that I have seen are different experiences with like resignation. I mean, even people who will take an Enneagram assessment and what they'll do with it is, oh, well, you see, that's my number. This is just who I am. So y'all can all just go suck it, which is kind of a form of resignation, which pushes people away. Or this is my number. This is who I am. And so I suck. But it could also be, okay, this really helps me understand and accept where I am right now, but also gives me clarity of what the path forward looks like as I continue to grow.
Yeah. One of the things that the Enneagram reveals is that people over-identify who they are with their personality.
Yes.
Like they tend to think, oh, my personality is my identity. I'm a 4 on the Enneagram. I'm a artsy, creative person who, blah, 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 blah. Well, if you've read the scriptures or even many schools of psychology, your personality is not who you are. It's something you have. Your personality is largely a set of defensive stratagems that you came up with as a little person to deal with relationships in life, right? Like if I do these things, I get my needs met. Now, the things that help you in the morning of life can kill you in the afternoon or become self-defeating behaviors that don't work in adulthood. So what the Enneagram can reveal is like, oh, when I was a little person as an Enneagram 2, I learned that if I'm very agreeable, if I accommodate everybody else's wishes, if I try to people please till I'm, I can hardly stand up anymore, if I meet other people's needs and disregard my own, then I will get my needs met and I will love myself.
Things will go well for me. Yeah.
Things will go well for me. And then you do that as a little kid and people are like, oh, little Greg, he's such a sweet little kid and he does all these nice things and they pat him on the head, right? And then you get to adulthood, it's like, oh, wait a minute, those things don't work anymore.
Yeah.
And I can begin to learn that my identity is far deeper and richer, more complex and spiritual than I ever imagined. And I get past personality stuff and get down to your essential self.
And those things that don't work anymore were the childhood strategies, which made perfect sense as a child that I developed those. But
absolutely.
But then as an adult, when I'm employing a childhood strategy, that's where the insanity comes in. That's where the destructiveness comes in. You've probably been talking to people and seen a shift. They just went into child consciousness.
Oh yeah. And people who know the Enneagram and who've done some work on themselves, right? They'll I was out with a friend of mine the other day. He's an Enneagram 3 and I love this guy and he's in recovery. He's a recovering alcoholic and he is so freaking funny. And the other day, he's an Enneagram 3, right? And he's a sales guy, super successful sales guy. And we are out and the waiter came to the table and he has been to this restaurant many times. And he said to the guy, oh yeah, you're Bob, right? And the guy goes, oh no, Bob's my brother. I'm Ted. And he goes, oh, that's right. You're the good looking one. And it like he just turned it on for a second, right? Like he was going to make a sale, right? Like he was covering his mistake and then was going to like make the sale. And I looked at him and he went, "Oh yeah, that was pretty Enneagram 3, wasn't it?" So that's kind of the fun of self-discovery, is that, and he did it in a way that wasn't beating himself up. It's just like, oh yeah, well of course I've been doing that since I was a little kid making the sale, and I don't have to do that.
And I don't have to do that. But if I do, like I'm going to laugh it off. I'm going to call my own foul. I'm going to say that's what happened. And my gosh, Ian, the freedom that we experience when we realize that somebody can know that I'm not perfect and my world doesn't explode.
Yeah. In the book, The Fix, I talk about how humor and humility derive from the same root word.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, a sign of a person developing spiritually is their increasing ability to laugh at themselves.
I love that. And it seems terrifying, I imagine, because two other words that are pretty close together are humility and humiliation, and so like to be humble until we've experienced humility is actually a very healing and connected experience. And it doesn't always have to go to humiliation until we've taken that risk and found that it doesn't always go to the tragic place. We just don't know what we're missing.
It's interesting, right? Though I would say that oftentimes people come to a 12-step program through the portal way of humiliation.
Mm-hmm.
Like you've been busted, you're out of ammo, you're powerless, you know that there's nothing else you can do, you're down and out. And then you develop humility, and maybe a fruit of humility is humor. So there is a season, hopefully it's brief, where humiliation, where we're really kind of brought to our knees, and then we find humility, and then we find a little bit of humor as we move along on the journey. Like, oh yeah, this is what humans do. I mean, like, humans make mistakes, and I've learned to treat my mistakes as what they are versus, some kind of indictment of my fundamental self.
Man, that sounds like such a healthy and appealing trajectory to pursue. Thanks for pointing that out. We're going to make sure that people know how to get in touch with you, how to connect with all of the different resources that you offer. Ian, I'm so excited about the fix. I can't wait for it to come out. We're recording this in the fall. I think that by the time people are hearing this, the book release is only going to be about a week away. And I can't encourage people enough to check that out. Thank you, because what you said you wanted, which was where you are and what you've experienced, to be something that helps people discover their place in the world. I know that's happened to so many people. It's been a part of what's brought change in my life. And so I just want to express gratitude and appreciation for you being where you are and opening up to do what you do.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I hope the fix will be a lifeline to people to help them find the healing and the health and the life that God has for them, and that they can see that the 12 steps are not just reserved for those people down in the basement of the church, leaving cigarette butts in their parking areas outside the church. You know what I mean? Like, oh, guess what? It's for everybody.
That's right.
And anybody can work these steps and experience a spiritual awakening that will dramatically improve their lives. And that's what the fix is all about. I hope they get it.
I hope they do too. I also appreciate so much you taking the time to be on the podcast. I hope that one of the next times I'm in Nashville, we can meet at Lady Bird and grab a taco together.
All right. I'd love it.
Take care.
All right. Be well.